Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Watch Premier League, Women's Super League, EFL, Scottish Premiership and much more. Live on Sky Sports.
Yeah, welcome back. It's Richie McCormick here with you. Delighted to say we are joined on the line by Calum Jacobs, the editor of a brand new book just released today called A New Formation, How Black Footballers Shaped the Modern Game. As I say, just out today. So first and foremost, Calum, happy release day to you. How does it feel to have the product finally out there in the world?
Yeah, it feels very good. It takes a very long time to get a book to this stage. There are so many steps you have to move through, and it feels very gratifying now because there are periods in the journey where you almost feel like chucking it in, really, because it's just so hard. But yeah, we're here now and I'm really happy. So yeah,
I'd say for yourself it's all the more difficult because it's obviously a series of essays and it's not just yourself that's been involved in it. So you're kind of master of your own destiny in a sense when you're just writing a book from start to finish. But drawing as many influences and different people as you have done for this, it can be a bit trickier.
Yeah, it's almost like herding cats, is what my friend said to me at the very beginning. You have to have a different approach sometimes for every writer. Some writers want to sit and talk to you on the phone for 3 hours about their essay. Other writers don't want really any input or communication from you because they work like that. And yeah, other people are a bit more collaborative. But I've edited in the past, so I kind of came at it with an editor's hat on.
Okay.
And understood the brief. But yeah, you're completely right. You're kind of waiting on other people sometimes as well, but it's all part of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience. Where was the genesis of the book for you? Like, what was your jumping off point, I guess? Was there a particular piece you read that said that this might, fit together with something else like this, or if we discussed or went down this certain pathway with a certain player, it might be of interest and it might make a decent piece? What was the genesis of the book?
To be honest with you, so my background is in editorial. I actually founded a magazine. It's called Caricom. It explores football in the same way that the book does. And really what I wanted to do, or what I was seeking to do, was kind of expand on what I'd done in that, which is to sometimes use black players as avatars to discuss broader themes and ideas that speak particularly to the black experience. And so I think the genesis of the book, really, it stemmed from my work there. And the players I chose that feature in the book or are written about, that came to me slightly more slowly. And it was kind of based on things that some of those players had done or said, or things that they represented, if that makes sense, because there's quite a few players featured, so different ideas for different players came to me at different times, probably. There's
so many different strands, I guess, that you could have gone down, like you say, from the off in this book, that it's not a book about racism. This is essentially a book celebrating in some instances highlighting, in some instances simply telling the story of certain black figures within football. But it must have been a difficult process to whittle down who you're actually going to talk about here, because the spectrum of black influences on football has grown exponentially. From, we think about what would have been the mid to late 70s when black footballers first became prevalent in English football, to now, whereby it's just a much broader sphere than what it used to be. To actually have to, whatever about coalescing your contributors, coalescing your subjects, was a difficult prospect, I'd imagine, as well.
Yeah, it definitely was. What I tried to do as well was avoid retelling obvious or prevalent narratives that people probably felt that they already knew. So, for example, somebody like Danny Rose features in the book, and people might not expect him to feature in a book about the formation of black culture or influencing the black cultural landscape that we kind of all inhabit to different extents now. And I didn't think maybe that his story or what he represented or things that he said had been told. So that was one aspect of it, as I said, kind of chronicling players who you maybe overlooked because they're not as glamorous or big names, but they still mean something, they still represent something. And you've got someone like Anita Ashante in the book as well, and she's won everything in the women's game that there is to win. But maybe her name doesn't come up frequently enough, and maybe we hear about Eniola Aluko or Alex Scott. And this isn't to say we shouldn't, but there are other characters who are distinct and do mean something to people. But then in the case of somebody like Ian Wright, I feel like we all know Ian Wright's story in outline, and he makes up a large part of where we are now. I think you can kind of trace the behaviour or the cultural expressions of a lot of black players today. It's kind of rooted in the way he expanded black identity in this country. So you think about just the haircuts he had, the goal celebrations he would attempt, just his general exuberance, being his full authentic self, bringing that to the pitch is part of the reason why you've got Jesse Lingard doing the moonwalk and stuff like that. It's part of being saying, you know, I'm black, this is my culture, and I can bring it into the game. But what we did with Ian Wright, rather than tell the story that everyone knows, is look at his career post-retirement, how he's kind of ascended to the place that he's in now. And it wasn't an easy road by any measure. But now what he means to younger black people who never watched him play, he's arguably even more relevant now, or his relevancy hasn't diminished. And we looked at, you know, his TV career, which was unprecedented, the place he holds, I suppose, in the imagination and in the subconscious of Britain today. And we tried to do that. The contributors and I tried to do that with everyone that we spoke to or wrote about, was to basically say, hey, there's another story here, there's a deeper story here, there's a perspective here that might have been missed, and we want to tell that story.
Focusing on Wright, like it's a incredible journey, and it's an incredible growth that he's been on, because I remember when he first retired and translated then into the sphere of being a pundit, there was a slight suggestion that he was there as a kind of court gesture, and he was there purely to bring a bit of levity to things. But recalling, as it was in the book, we're going back to 2018, whereby he's being asked to talk about the issue of race, and he's being given his 50 seconds essentially on Match of the Day or in the live coverage of the match, whatever it was, Gary Lineker thrown to him anyway, that he really hit upon something deeper than I think anybody was really expecting. And it shows that there's a maturity there that he wasn't necessarily given credit for, I don't think, during his playing days. And there's a maturity of thought that was there that I don't think he was given credit for during his playing days. And that really has evolved on camera over the last 10, 15 years, really.
Exactly. I think he occupies a unique position in many senses. First of all, I would say he is definitely somewhat of a spokesperson for lots of black people in Britain. I resist the term the black community because I feel like it's just too nebulous for that. But when he comes out and speaks about, for example, the African Cup of Nations not receiving the respect it deserves, we're really grateful for that, because he has the status and the vantage to speak like that. And I think we have seen like a huge maturity in him. And I do think he was, fulfilling a role that, do you know what, to be honest, I feel like a lot of black guys listening to this, or people who have black friends listening to this would say, you know, there is this, I don't know, I know there are a few, there definitely is a capacity in black men, in order to appear less threatening, to be the comic relief. And maybe that's what Ian Wright was doing in the beginning. But now, yeah, he definitely understands his responsibility and his purpose. And he also exists in a space where we kind of allow him, and this isn't something that's allowed to all black figures, to be complex. We allow the contradictions in him and even the mistakes, and we can all see and know his life and still take him to our hearts. So he occupies that space as well, which I think is really rare for a black public figure. Usually you have to exemplify a kind of form of excellence or exceptionalism. And
there are boxes to be ticked, essentially.
Yeah, he breaks that mold and he breaks that down. And yeah, he's somebody, as I said, who is definitely going to make that possible for the next black pundit who transitions into the same space that he's occupying now. Yeah.
It almost mirrors, in a way, without wanting to talk too much about Wright, because there's so many characters we can talk about from the book, but that's, initial translation from being a player into a pundit and trying to fit into the punditry world as best he could, and maybe gone lighter than you possibly should have done in terms of tone. Like, there's a line that jumps out from the description of him in the book, whereby during his first goal for Arsenal against Leicester, like, his celebration is like a pure encapsulation of black expression. And that isn't necessarily something that existed in the footballing world before Ian Wright, because you think of the players that were involved in football beforehand, they were almost making a real point of trying to fit into what was essentially just a white world. Whereas Wright was, as you mentioned, comfortable enough in his own skin to just go, listen, I am a black man from South London, and this is how we act, and I'm not going to shirk that on the pitch.
Exactly, yeah. I feel like if you look at old goal celebrations from other players who played at that point, they would, mimic the celebrations to look at that specifically of the white players. And it would be, so they would basically constrain themselves in a way that and I think as well, because obviously Ian Wright came late to the game, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, the Premier League Hall of Fame today, and I saw his tweet and he said, look, you have to understand, like, I came to the game late. I never thought I was going to be here. So I feel like his blackness and the exuberance that comes from just feeling so, I suppose, grateful to be there, without trying to sound condescending, but he might suggest that himself.
He was nearly 28 when he signed for Arsenal, for God's sake. I think he'd every right to be somewhat feeling of gratitude that things had come so late to him in his career.
But he was messaged by other players. I think Robbie Earle he was on, I think he does NBC, I'm not too sure, but he broke down into tears when he was talking about Ian Wright, because he said, like, I don't think you understand, like, how important it was for me to see you doing that. Because you can imagine a lot of these players, and again, I go back to society and I draw a parallel to black people who are in overwhelmingly white workspaces. You straitjacket yourself, you keep your head down, but that takes a psychological toll. And whether Ian Wright knew that or not, I'm not too sure, but it definitely allowed other players and people in society to say, I'm black and I'm British at the same time. But as a result of the amalgamation of those two identities, I behave like this and you're going to accept it.
Is football a more welcoming world now for not just for black players, but also for black supporters, black journalists, black broadcasters, whatever it might be? Is it an easier place to occupy now, or does it feel like the otherness is different and that the expectations are slightly different, or that, as you mentioned there might be, you have to reach a certain level of exceptionalism to fit in, as it were?
I think that's an interesting question. I think there has been, I would describe the shift as incremental rather than a large one. I was speaking to a black broadcaster last year who works on a lot of TV channels over here, speaking to her, and she said that when she's in the newsroom or when she's in like a press box, whatever, she does still feel like the odd one out. She does still feel like she has to kind of be slightly inhibited and don't make too much noise because she's a black woman. And so based on that testimony, I think we can say things haven't become that much more welcoming. And I still think there is like a hegemony that exists. In terms of supporters, I go to Crystal Palace games a lot, always have done. And I go to Arsenal games a lot. I think Arsenal is the exception, so maybe I'll discount them, because having had as many black players as they had and where they are in London, you see, a huge diversity in their fan base. But yeah, I go to Crystal Palace games and I've been to a few low league games, and you do see more black fans. And I personally don't feel threatened going to games, but I think there is like a historical connotation there for why some black fans still don't go to games. So yeah, I'd say I think there's been an incremental shift, and you might get more black people now saying I'll go to games, but in the media landscape, I still think it's overwhelmingly white, and most of the producers for TV shows or radio and stuff will probably still be white, and a lot of news desks up and down the country will still find no black sports writers or sports writers of colour. That's still a big issue that they need to somehow tackle.
In terms of like you touched on Palace there, like South London is obviously referenced in the book to a huge degree. The influence that it's had on I guess black experience within the football world over the past. I was going to say like it goes back to the likes of Michael Thomas and Paul Davis and David Rocastle at Arsenal, but it's grown so much since then that its claws are pretty much everywhere in the Premier League and beyond now at this stage. And South London has produced so many excellent black football figures over the last while. It's insane, really.
It is, yeah, it is. And sometimes it will just be like a 5 mile patch, so like between Brixton, Thornton Heath, and Streatham, the players that have emerged from that region. And Jadon Sancho comes from Kennington, Nathaniel Klein, I believe is Brixton. And now if you look at Palace now, I was watching them against Chelsea, and I think they had like 6 or 7 black players in the starting 11, and majority of those were British players. There is something about this region and something to be said for the communities that have been formed here, because obviously black people flowed into South London. So there's obviously a migrational element there. We've got a huge build-up of West African and Caribbean communities here. But what those communities did was, I suppose, they formed football teams and they formed footballing structures, I should say, which support the clubs and that the clubs extract players from and bring into their academy. So I think that's partly it. And I think there is a cultural element where I suppose a lot of people in South London, I know I did, aspire to be footballers because it feels closer, because there is such a large contingent of us playing. So you do tend to think, I can do it too. And obviously just because there are so many clubs here and so many scouts watching all the teams that exist here. But yeah, Anifiok's piece really goes into detail in looking at why that is, and also the role that a lot of black coaches play in nurturing those players and offering that structure and that foundation to be successful, really. Because I suppose maybe the archetype of a coach that exists is kind of old school, older white guy. And there's a lot of like young black guys in the community who are doing amazing work and funneling these players into professional football.
There seems to be more of a conversation in terms of South London. I don't mean that overtly in the sense of speaking, but in terms of a back and forth and pathways being offered one way and the other for players to graduate through clubs, be they big or small, and for the coaching to come downwards and try and help to, I guess, bring football to the community as well. That seems to be more of a two-way street in South London than it will be pretty much anywhere else in England at the moment.
I think so. If you look at what Palace do, they do so much in the community to not only foster good relationships with feeder clubs, but the community at large, like more broadly. When I was young, Palace used to do Kids for a Quid, and I think they still do that now. So they're always looking at the next generation and trying to build those ties, because I think they understand that the relationship is symbiotic and it is two-way, and it's necessary for, they need the community as much as the community needs them, and they don't feel distinct and separated. So yeah, I completely agree. That conversation is ongoing and really fruitful.
So in essence, like when you see bigger clubs, like I don't like in terms of the London experience, say like Chelsea or an Arsenal, is that they become so big that they're not necessarily of the community anymore. Where we have a Crystal Palace who very much are from the community, and Brentford as well in West London will be the same, whereby they are very much representative of where they come from. Where you have, say Liverpool, Manchester United, they're so big, it's not necessarily just about their area anymore.
Yeah, I'd say QPR, Millwall, are a brilliant community club. Charlton as well. If we look at the players they produce, and they've got so Jason Ewell's a coach down there, and obviously Chris Powell was there. So you see this lineage, but yeah, these clubs are bastions in the community. They understand that they are representative of the community, and they enable people from the community to feel proud of where they come from, and they are, they're kind of entrenched in a way that, yeah, I think it's true. As I said, I go to Arsenal games, And I don't feel as connected to Arsenal because of their largesse, because of their size. And also, I mean, even if you look at the players that Arsenal haven't signed of late, even in the Wenger years, they overlooked a lot of the players in London that have gone on to thrive at other clubs. So if you look at, Michael Elise is at Palace now, but he was in London. Joe Gomez obviously went to Liverpool. Nathaniel Klein went to Liverpool. These players didn't go to a club like Arsenal. I don't know. They weren't looking in that direction anymore. Hopefully that will shift back. But I do think that is partly connected to not being as present or influential in the communities located immediately around them, I guess.
Yeah, it's something that, to a degree, to a larger degree, I guess, happens here because football is such a local thing here in Ireland that clubs have no other option than to be present in the community and to try and interact with the community and bring it up as much as the locals can try and bring the club up as well. It's probably difficult. It's probably like picking a favourite child in terms of favourite pieces from the book. But is there one in particular or a couple in particular that stand out to you?
It's tough. It is really tough because I feel like there are so many that do something completely radically new. Ini Fiok's piece is brilliant, and I think it's really important to document and chronicle what he has done because there is just so little out there that takes the time to sensitively archive this work. I would say I can't pick a favorite. I won't pick a favorite, but I will say Sana Qureshi, who's a brilliant writer, she wrote a piece about Black Muslim footballers, and I've never read a piece like that before, and the kind of specificity she goes into with talking to. So she flipped it, rather than talking to a player, she spoke to Black Muslim football fans, and they told her what it means to see Black Muslim players succeed in the league and to see them practice or pray the Ayat al-Kursi prayer, or to say to practice salat after a goal. And they how much research Black Muslim fans do to find out who the Muslim players are, because obviously that might not always be in their Wikipedia page, for example. And then when they find that out, they kind of hold those players closer, even if they don't support the team that player plays for. And I just thought that was a really interesting detail and kind of spoke to identity and how it can be formed and how it can be protected, especially when we look at a lot of subtle and over Islamophobia that kind of streaks a lot of press and the media, wider media. So yeah,
and it's become a more visible thing in the last while. Like it would have been difficult to point out before if a player was breaking their fast for Ramadan. But now we've routinely seen the likes of Wesley Fofana or Sadio Mane or Mo Salah or whatever, who would be observing, go off for that minute or two to break the Ramadan fast and then come back on. And it's pointed out, and it just becomes a normal facet of the game. Having prayer rooms, etc., at stadiums has become a facet of the game for a lot of clubs, and it's just making things regular and as normal as they are for these communities. I guess helps everybody along, really.
Exactly, and I think we should be in no doubt, really, as well, that the players, whether that's being hands-on, I suppose, and I know at Newcastle there was a contingent of Muslim players for a while. Demba Ba, Hatem Ben Arfa, Cheick Tiote, may he rest in peace, and a few others who asked for a prayer room and Newcastle didn't have it. And then that cultural change catches on, doesn't it? In the same way that we now see sensory rooms at grounds for autistic fans. And what that does is, people talk a lot about inclusivity and representation, and they can almost become woolly terms that aren't actually attached to real change. But when you can make Muslim people feel comfortable going to a ground and be, and feel seen in a positive way, then you're going to improve the sport and you're going to bring more people to the table. And as you said, it is completely normal. And Sana makes this contrast in the essay where she says, when Demba Ba touched his forehead to the turf after I think he'd scored, Alan Pardew kind of subtly hinted at, I don't know, he seemed to be slightly uncomfortable with the fact that, hey, I've got this player I've paid money for and he's not eating or drinking. Like, is he going to be sharp? And then Rodgers, by contrast, is complimentary and commending these players, which I suppose makes Islam feel less alien to broader society who maybe aren't as familiar with it as, I am or you might be, for example,
And listen, it's a fantastic book, Calum, and really congratulations on pulling it all together. As you mentioned, herding cats, trying to get all these different pieces and all these essays together, but they do form a cohesive whole, and there's a lot to be good to be taken from it, and it is a fantastic work. So congratulations. The New Formation is what the book is called, How Black Footballers Shaped the Modern Game, and it is out today. Calum Jacobs, thank you so much for taking time out to speak to us this evening.
Thanks so much for having me, Richie. Really enjoyed it.
Anytime at all.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Watch Premier League, Women's Super League, EFL, Scottish Premiership and much more. Live on Sky Sports.